Cool. Yeah, I'm excited about this. And so for the sake of the recording, I'll say that Ethan is like a long-term friend and was kind enough to sign up to the this teaching thing like before there was much in the way of like educational material actually on the page. So we're doing like a lesson to balance that out. So that's the context here.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you have in mind?
I think it could just be nice to like, I've not gone over what I have with anybody else. Like the only things I've done in terms of showing what I've worked on or what I've been like accumulating to anybody else has been like basically showing like a couple of beats that were appropriate to work on with my friend Max to him. And other than that, it's just like I kind of had these two pools that I put together last year because writing was sort of feeling impossible. Um, and so I thought like, okay, well, fine, if writing is impossible, like I can at least go through and look at the things that I have written and the things that I have made before, like 98% of which never got finished, because I just went through a phase of like starting a lot of things to figure out like what might be possible to do for me, and then just like finished a few of those ideas, but percentage wise it was like maybe, I mean, like less than 1%, that I have like more than 9 songs I guess in the world, but there were like 9 songs that I did in total with friends producing. And then I guess everything else didn't really come from me. It was like working on other people's things pretty much
Right.
constitutes like everything else that I have that is like publicly available. And so I feel like I very much am not, I like have not done even anything, even like approaching the thing that I want to do the most yet, creatively. So it's kind of like, let me see if I can get ready to do that over the next 3 to 5 years of like putting out music and just figure out like where I'm at. Because I started to have the sense of like, I need to stop trying to make anything new unless I'm really confident, like trying to start anything new unless I'm really, really confident that I'm doing something that I didn't do before. Because there were so many ideas that were started, yeah, like over the last 5 years. And I had just never sat down and gone through all of my recordings and all of my like free writes that I had typed up. Um, so I did that. And so last year I got to the place where like with the lyrics, I was basically just like going through text files and just trying to like tag them with like the general theme of what the lyric seemed to be about, or like the most of it was free writes. And if it was a free write, trying to cut anything that I wasn't into, trying to cut away anything that I didn't feel like could be like useful. So there's like almost 400 notes that have had all most of what was in them deleted and are down to just kind of like what could be useful lines, and then they're tagged. So it's like if I think, okay, I want to talk about death, I can like go and find all the stuff that I wrote that where I look what I when I look at it, I go, okay, this is about death, you know.
Hmm.
Um, and then it's not quite the same thing with the recordings. I just put everything into, I'll share it with you in a second, but I put everything that I had still from the last several years that was like a voice memo or a bounce of like a demo or something into a giant Ableton set, um, where I could just like trigger everything as a clip. And my thought process is that definitely new things are going to have to be written, and I'm going to keep getting better, and I'm going to keep having ideas that are like on the spot. Oh, okay, this is this makes sense. But I wanted going into this kind of like phase of my life where it just feels going into a phase of my life where it feels like I just don't have as much time to do that kind of thing. I just wanted to really focus on putting things together.
Yeah.
So this is kind of my attempt. Like last year was kind of my attempt to set up a situation for myself where I could, in a lot of cases, hopefully go in and just put things together. And I mean, obviously have to replay things, have to re-sing things, all that, but that like the ideas are there and that I'm just cutting together at the least the demos of what I want, and trying to like make something out of all this stuff that I started, um,
Yeah.
over this huge period of time, which has also turned into like realizing that it's a pretty amazing thing to be able to have all your voice memos and just speed things up and like pitch them up and down. And that has really like gotten my imagination going for us. Some of these things that I thought were not that great could be songs.
Yeah.
um just going up or down like a minor third, or sometimes up or down like an octave, and then like changing the tempo by anywhere from like usually 50% or so in either direction. Within that range, you'll just find ideas where you're like, whoa, this guitar line actually does sound cool if it's just twice as fast, you know.
Right.
i
Yeah.
thought i
Yeah.
thought it was lame, but all I have to do is just play it really fast or record it and play it back really fast and write over that, and like that is inspiring.
Yeah.
um so that's kind of like, I thought maybe I would show you that, because I've not shown any of that stuff to anybody else. And I feel like you, of all people that I know, would probably have an idea of like how to approach making anything happen out of like a giant collection of ideas like that, like essentially just like a giant mess, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I
that
have a
has a lot of
thought.
different sounds.
Yeah, I have a thought already that could be a useful frame to kind of keep in mind as we like jump around and listen. And also
Sure.
like thank you for sharing these things with me. And
Sure, man.
I'm excited to hear them.
Yeah.
So um I had like a sort of like a composition lesson a few years ago now, because time is really crazy, where the idea was really raised to me of like the question of like what is your like project. It could be as a composer or like as a music maker, but I guess it means like in like pop music or whatever, or like in indie rock less explicitly, but there's the idea of like a brand or like an identity, you know, and that's more like coming from like outside. It's like how do you market this thing, which is kind of a cynical way of looking at it. But I think with composers, there's a question of like what your project is, or sort of what like the core thrust of your work is. And for me, that idea was really limiting for a long time, because I was like, I want to do a ton of stuff, like, and I have the work ethic to do it, so I'm going to do it. But now I'm understanding it's like even if whether you do four things in you know in a musical life, or you do like a million, I think if it's being made by one person, there just will be things that you find yourself repeating and you find yourself drawn to, and there will be other things that you're not drawn to, or that you can kind of let fall away without feeling like you're missing anything, you know. And so it could just be interesting to think about like if we discover some sort of like core aesthetic project, what that is. And like for some people it means doing a lot of very different things. Like I'd say like an example would be like, I don't know how well you know John Zorn's music. Yeah, but he's somebody who's done like a million things, and like it'll sound really different, but there are things about it that make it always John Zorn. Like his thing is that he's really interested in like working with people and like creating situations where other people can do stuff. Or like I mean, I'm kind of giving kind of heady examples, but like John Cage did like a million things, but at the core of it, there's kind of this like being present, like whether he's writing music on paper, or he's like writing weird, like, or writing poetry where he's just like deleting words from well-known texts until he just has like words and spaces. But it's like a thing, and it's like when you experience it, it's like something that only this consciousness could have like brought into the world, you know. And so I'm yeah, it's funny that I'm kind of using these very heady examples like in this case, but yeah, I guess I'm curious about what we find as like common threads, because like I, more than probably anybody that I know, am really interested in like things that are radically different somehow still kind of coexisting within like a body of work. And at least that's how I'm trying to think about it, is like the question of like a project, and but like a lifelong project, like not like this project or that project, because like they're all related if you do a bunch of different projects, because the common thread is like you know. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to raise that idea, and maybe we can come back to it. But yeah, where should we
That's cool
start?
though.
Yeah.
That's actually super cool. And we could even talk about that a little bit, because I think that I've been searching for that concept to a certain extent that I feel like, yeah, I felt like the need for, and I've actually just like, because over during the first year of the pandemic, like I took a bunch of marketing classes from a really like an author that I really respected, and I really enjoy his voice on like what marketing actually is. So I'm a lot less cynical about marketing because I think that like on some level it really is just like it's a service to people. Like if you want to make music, I feel like we all want to actually make music because somebody presented us with something that made an enormous amount of sense to us, even if the way in which it made sense to us really challenged us. Like even if when we first look at it, we don't know what it is. Um, like we are, I mean, I'm a musician for sure because like I want to write songs because somebody wrote songs in such a way where I looked at it and went like, this makes the most sense out of anything that I've ever
Yeah,
heard in my life, and like, and that comes down to like the way that the music sounds, the way that the person presents the music, like if they were a live performer, like how they presented themselves on stage, how they talked about or didn't talk about their music, like all of those things, who they choose to work with and why they say they choose to work with, and just what it sounds like their rationale was, and how that like fits into your life at the time that you hear it. I don't know, all of that stuff. And like really all of that is marketing, whether you're making a conscious choice about it or not. you know like there's kind of no way to escape that if you're presenting your work publicly, you're doing marketing, and also other people are doing marketing for you. Especially if your thing catches on, if anybody pays any attention to your thing at all, they're going to do marketing for it. If they try, like as
right.
soon as they start trying to communicate to other people about it, they're doing marketing. And so sometimes like, succeeding publicly as an artist is a matter of like helping people do that marketing. And I think a lot of like pop artists, obviously, but also like a lot of successful independent artists did things to help their audience like communicate basically, and like help their audience do marketing for them, whether that was like creating language to help people talk about their music, saying like this is what this is actually about, or making it really obvious in like the visual language and the way that things are presented and the way that they're singing and which instruments they're using and all that stuff, and like what blurbs they probably wrote for the reviewers who reviewed their music and who their fans are going to read or like listen to. That's all, to me, that's all like part of the same process. And I think that
Right.
like the last couple of years I've been thinking a lot about how much, and I don't know why this is. I think this is just like this kind of, I think there's just kind of like this nasty tendency that I'm trying to like make the most of, this kind of like good old days ism, because I resonate so much with medieval music in particular. And that, like the concerns of those composers, while they're sort of like akin to modern artists, feel so like alien almost, and like that music feels so pure to me in a way that there's something there that I always want to like see if I can connect to.
Yeah.
And
Let
that's
me
kind of
let
like,
me or sorry, actually I don't
yeah,
want to
no, go
interrupt.
go
Sorry, go ahead.
ahead. No, you
Well,
can.
okay. Well, I was gonna say, as far as like a project, and like maybe if there is a space between project and marketing, it's like project. Like project is like what you do within the work and
It's like our
decisions you make about how
intention.
to create the
Yeah.
work. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
it's also like, for example, if you always work with an acoustic guitar, that can be pursued or perceived externally as like a marketing, but it's also it's a definition of the scope of your project. It's like
Yeah.
I'm gonna deal with this thing for 4 decades and find something.
Yeah.
Or if you choose to work a lot in DAWs, those are shaping things. But there's something else that's more personal to it, which is, I think it has to do with the medieval music, and also has to do with the stuff that you've been working on with Max and the Ableton Note thing. And I think this is really where it gets beyond anything really that's like explicitly musical, and it just gets into the nature of like an identity. But I think something that interesting that you have going on is that like you have a certain like awareness of and engagement with some elements of pop culture, but at the same time, I think there's something in you that probably is like why we kind of like found each other as friends, where you're drawn to like very large concepts and very like open spaces and things that feel ancient, and or maybe not things that feel ancient, but like there this sort of timelessness, whether it's like Irish music or like medieval music. It feels like there's some back and forth between like the present moment and like eternity, but not in a way where I've ever really heard you make anything that's like particularly like corny or like cliched in its expression of eternity. Like the closest thing that I can think of to like, for example, like either kind of like drone music that's like very obviously like about like the universe, or like ambient music that's trying to be profound. The closest thing that I can think of that you've done is like the circular breathing saxophone stuff, but that sounds incredible. So it's really not corny at all. And I think in that there's the experience and the sound of the saxophone, which is, there are a lot of associations with that, but then you make it sound a little bit different and almost like a guitar, and it's like almost these pop music patterns because it's kind of like post like Philip Glass minimalism like a little bit, which has to do with the modern day, but it also keeps on going, and so it feels ancient, and it's like kind of the poetics of that. I feel like there's a lot that's being said there that doesn't have very much to do with the notes, and I feel like that is a lot of what I see as being like kind of like you and like your personality. I also, for me, I have a hard time identifying my own, like myself. Like it's very difficult for me to identify like a core thing, and it's totally there, but sometimes it's easier from the outside. And so I guess what I'm getting at, like an example would be, I was talking to a friend. His name's Gleb. He's like a bass clarinet player and really incredible musician and composer, and like ran a tape label for a little while and stuff. And he was talking about one of my pieces, and he was talking about like how he hears like Maine in the piece, and he also hears this like this sense of like the expanse, but also this sense that there's no interaction between the person who's perceiving the expanse and the expanse, and it like raises all these questions about like how the person who is perceiving the expanse has like social relationships and stuff. And I'd never thought about any of it before, but it was all totally there in the music. And so I guess I'm raising all of this stuff because it's like it's almost like sound and music come second, and I feel like there are these really fundamental things about what you care about that are actually like they're mysterious up until you get explicit about them, and then the danger when you get explicit about them is that you make a statement that feels wrong, and then you have to correct it, but you have to figure out why it's wrong, and then you have to feel your way through that in the same
Yeah.
way that you'd feel through like a production project that doesn't feel quite right but is something but isn't quite what you want it to be. But I guess when I say working on your project, it's like all of that is accessible artistic material. And that can be the core of things. Like that can be like really what gives you a baseline to make decisions from. Yeah, and so I just wanted to raise that because I feel like you do have an aesthetic, and I think it's cool. And I think maybe the aesthetic leads in a lot of places, and there are a lot of different interests. But I think that whatever the like there's something in them that could potentially be like a unifying factor that's not like, oh, I always work with beats and synths, but it's like you have these like existential things that you return to.
Well,
So
that's the thing for me is that it's more than anything. I think I kind of realized on some level, yeah, like on some level, really by thinking about like these like Masho and these medieval composers and like what they were doing, which was, I mean, largely responding to market forces in a lot of cases. Like they all had their own takes, but like, they all write sacred music and they all write chanson. And it's like, that's for a reason, because that's essentially like, it's funny. Like, I think that in some ways, to a lot of my favorite composers, like the sounds are secondary in the sense that, yeah, they don't sit there and go like, I'm going to, maybe for one project, they sit there and go like, I'm going to build everything around this synth just to keep themselves from going insane or whatever. Or like, yeah, like this is a guitar record, but it's like a lot of my favorite artists move from one thing to the next. When if they don't have the technical capability to do it, they just find people who do, and then they like work with that.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, but yeah, like just it's really the storytelling aspect of it that interests me the most, which is probably the biggest reason that I like abandoned the saxophone, was because as like aesthetically there's still plenty of stuff there to explore, or I guess distance myself from saxophone and jazz. It's like there was aesthetically a lot there that was explorable, and I still go back sometimes and listen to things and go like, yeah, like I want that sound, or I want to like flirt with that sound, um and bring it in. But yeah, it's like the sound is almost secondary to this like undercurrent that is there of,
and I
I
I
don't
have
know,
a
yeah,
quick
like
comment too. Okay, which is that like I have the same thing with the guitar, where if I'm letting the guitar steer me, I'm led towards things that I don't care about that much. And
Yeah.
that makes trying to write on the guitar very disorienting because I'm like, I think I like music, I think I like the guitar, but like I can't, you know. And so
Yeah.
for me, I like working from the perspective of like what is my project. Um, it lets me have a like create a frame, not as not and frame could mean like a lot of different things, but it creates a context where like I'm using the guitar for a reason, and that lets me not start with the guitar but lets me use the technique that I have towards a specific end. And that's still a challenge, but it's like a different start point, you know? Whereas like if you're picking up the saxophone and you just have like jazz history like in your head and you're trying to like fight your way out, when like existentially you really have a totally different set of things that you care about. It's like practicing saxophone and practicing jazz and hoping that one day you'll wind up over here when you're moving in this direction is like,
Yeah.
it's like, cause I know, cause I mean I had the same kind of
Yeah.
experience. It's like it's confusing, but like if you are starting from over here and you're like, okay, here's this tool, you do have to constantly like kind of be like grappling with your own technique and your own awareness of history. But that's just a frame that I wanted to mention because
Yeah.
that's, yeah, that's like a core. And it doesn't like, for the sake of today, like, or I don't know, for me, like you can use the saxophone or not use the saxophone and it's all good. Like I like your music. So like, but I just wanted to raise that as like a context because like now it's like when I'm doing anything, when I'm writing a song or like when I'm working on sort of like a dark ambient record right now, and like when I'm doing that, like even though I can get kind of lost in the like the reeds, which you kind of need to do, or lost in the weeds of like trying to make it sound good, like there is this core like why am I really doing this thing that's
Yeah.
bringing me back to the core project, which I don't know, is how I'm trying to approach it. I'll know better whether it works in like 2 years, but
Yeah, and that's kind of
yeah.
like where my priorities have changed over the years is like I think I've just become more and more aware of like what I'm responding to as like a musician and what I'm responding to as a person
Mhm.
and what other people respond to and like what the people that I would like to respond to my music respond to and just trying to like be more aware of that in as much as I can. And there's definitely still like, I mean, there's very selfish aspects in like all of the music that I think I'm trying to make, but that is more just me like either being self-indulgent or just recognizing that sometimes the things that affect anybody else who hears your shit the most are just like the things that you really liked and you just did them because you liked them and because you are not actually like a singular thing, you know, like everybody is totally unique and also just like a jillion other people in the world, you know, like somebody else is probably going to respond to that thing that you're responding to so strongly, especially if it means you take the time to like refine it into something that really pops, you know, that really like has a very obvious presence to it, you know, and that's like
Yeah.
those are kind of like the risky bets that when they pay off enormously in terms of like aesthetics and creativity. So yeah, no, I know, I mean, I know what you mean. Because yeah, it's like there was so much stuff in jazz that I was just kind of responding to as like a saxophone player. And then even now, like as a guitar, like, you know, playing guitar and like acquiring some amount of guitar technique or whatever, then you like, you just get into this thing of like, you hear guitarists and you go, wow, that thing that they're doing is so cool. And then you're like, wait a minute, but it's also stupid. Like, and I have some of my favorite friends that like to talk to about me. I have one really good friend in particular. Like when we talk about music, a lot of the time we just talk about how stupid we think certain things are, even things that we enjoy. Like we'll listen to something and go like, yeah, the thing is that this is just really dumb. Like, and I'm not sure if, and then we kind of try to evaluate like, is it dumb in a way? And Max and I were doing this recently too on the song that we're working on. Like, I was just like, we need to just put in like a bunch of like bro step sounds. Like we need to see search for things that are just like really fucking dumb. And we would like find a sound and we're like, yeah, this is like so stupid and so awesome, you know? And it's like
Yeah.
it's not it's stupid. It's like it's dumb in a way that you respond to as a person, not dumb in a way that you respond to as a musician. Because there's just some things that people do on instruments where it's just like that's just like a thing you do because you're obsessed with the instrument and like it's cool because it's music, but it's also like aesthetically essentially like the antithesis of whatever it is that you might be looking for on like a song.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay,
like
a couple things really quick is that like yeah, one like for me like if there are those like cliches or just like things that you can do because you have an instrument and it doesn't
Yeah.
support like the real goal of the work, which has to
Yeah.
do with your own project, then like those are definitely the first things to cut away. I also
Yeah.
wanted to mention something kind of related to the instrument is this quote that like gets attributed to John Cage a lot, but I think it was originally a painter, it might have been Philip Guston, which is that like when you start painting like you're like everybody that you've ever met is in the room with you, like your family and like all your friends and like teachers and people that you don't like, and as you keep painting they like slowly leave the room until eventually it's just you and the painting, and then if you're really lucky even you leave. And so it's like that process of like going through, or it's like as you're going through the process getting more and more to like the core of whatever the artwork is and letting all of the external stuff fall away until at some point it's just you trying to figure it out. And then maybe if you get to this state in the process where you're really just focused on the work, then even your own ideas about what it needs to be will leave. And I think about that with the sort of instrument thing that we're practicing. I
Yeah.
also like, well, we're just like, because yeah, I want to be like giving you some stuff to chew on, as well as like hearing out where you're at and stuff. I think it's interesting that there's this back and forth between, like as you're saying, sort of like bro steppy sounds and also like medieval music and like folk music and all these things. And like I understand that, and that's kind of like for those of us that like had our coming of age in the 2010s with like Bon Iver and like Jesus and whatever else. I mean, for different
Yeah.
people, yeah, or blonde or whatever, there is this weird like everything kind of coexists thing. I think one of the questions that I have immediately for anybody dealing with that type of aesthetic is like, um, how do things like irony and sincerity exist?
Mm.
And is there, are you interested in collage, or are you interested in a sense of like unification, you know? And you
Yeah.
don't necessarily have to answer those now, but they're things to kind of like
Well, I mean,
chew
that's
on.
stuff that I've thought about. Like, I've
Yeah,
thought
yeah,
about that a lot because I mean, like, that was another one of the conversations that I used to have with certain friends all the time is just how dumb fusion tends to be.
yeah,
Especially when we were talking about when I was really into like when I was listening to Irish music a lot and like learning the tunes on saxophone and even like trying to learn to play wooden flute. And like my first 3 years of playing the guitar were pretty much entirely like the guitar was in dadgad. And the first things I learned were like solo arrangements, like fingerstyle arrangements of Irish tunes from artists that I was just really into at the time, like these guitarists who like play mostly in dadgad or other open tunings and like play these arrangements where they're playing bass and accompaniment and the melodies all at the same time. Um, yeah, just listening to Irish music all the time, listening to Scottish music all the time, like hearing all these artists. And there was just this weird like camp within that whole milieu of like there's an insane number of amazing musicians who just like almost nobody is ever going to know about who play that music. And like there were kind of three main varieties, and one was like just trad players who were just
mhm,
like really connected. It was kind of like jazz, honestly. It was way too similar to jazz for my comfort at the time. It was just like there's like the trad players who are like committed to just upholding this like specific tradition that they're connected to in this particular like approach to playing, which in Irish music there was some of the same kind of hostility that like jazz traditionalists have to like modernizing, but a lot of them were also like really into any kind of like modern form of the music. Just for them it was like, nah, but like my teacher played this way, or like my dad, a lot of times like my dad played this way, so like this is how I play, I'm doing my version of this thing, and like it's really important to me to just keep cultivating and preserving that. So they're like the trad players. And that was
yeah,
like, and they were only ever listening to records pretty much, or like looking at records from before a certain period of time.
yeah,
That's the music they were interested. Then there were like the modernizers, like the tasteful modernizers, people like Queeveen O'Reilly, who are always kind of like leaning into the connection that Irish music has to like ambient, that a lot of folk music has to like ambient music and drone music, and getting really into just like playing really softly or like playing very lyrically and like very tasteful use of effects, very kind of like cinematic, um like, and sometimes really really still super super beautiful, but like kind of like the Sigur Rós approach to like Irish music. And
right,
then like these various bands that were just doing like different forms of fusion that were almost always unironic, like fully unironic and like terminally cringe. And it was really funny to listen to because they were amazing musicians. Like it's exactly the thing I was talking about where you just look and you go, holy crap, like that guy can really play the whistle or whatever. But like they're doing it over this stupid EDM beat, and it's like literally just this. It's just pandering, you know. I guess at worst it's pandering. At best, it's just like they just have no taste. Like they're just kind
Yeah.
of like, yeah, this is cool, and like this is cool, and like they are both dance music, so like here we go. And so for a while, I was kind of allergic to just the notion of collage, even because I just thought that like collage was pretty much like most of the time going to result and stuff like that. And then I realized that a lot of my favorite artists were actually engaging in forms of that where they just figured out which elements of their music to merge with elements of other music or which elements of different kinds of music to merge. And I feel like producers do that a lot more successfully usually than like instrumentalists because that's how their brains work. Like that track that I played you, 5G, is literally just like three extremely naked different styles, like emo hyperpop vocals, Midwest emo guitar riff, drill drums, and they just goes whoop, and then like some kind of wub step, like bro steppy production techniques for flavor. And it's like those things are all really clearly there, and somehow they work great, you know. And part of that is just like
Yeah.
the artistry of like the like you know just the artistry of the song and like how what he's talking about engages you and like how his voice makes it work, you know, in the way that
Right.
like really good front people can make shit that's kind of ridiculous work, or things that are even kind of lackluster work. Although in that case, I think the production's really good. It's just like really judiciously chosen, but it's still really obvious what you're looking at. Like if you solo each track, it's like a pure piece of genre work, you know, and would not be. It sounds like you ripped three stems out of three different songs and jammed them together and then sang over it, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, that's I don't know. That's just kind of like a response off of like the thoughts that I've had to that notion of yeah, like collage versus chasing some kind of concept and letting your yeah, just like letting the music kind of form without being super explicit about like what you're referencing or while trying to kind of like Jackson Pollock cover what you're referencing, you know.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I've got a few things. For one thing, I think I mean, I hadn't really thought about fusion and how I was bringing this up because I feel like fusion and collage are pretty different. Like because with like jazz fusion, it's like all the materials are kind of like mixed together in like a
Yeah.
pot, you know? Whereas like if you look at a collage, it's like torn up bits of stuff that just exist next to
Yeah.
each other, even though they're clearly from different places and there's often no real attempt to bring them together.
Yeah.
And then I think what you're describing with the track that with 5G is interesting because I think it's potentially a slightly different thing, even though you can kind of trace the histories of the different materials. And so there's a different frame that's been really useful for me, not just in music making, but in life. And I think there are a few different terms that I've heard used to describe this. One of them was from this theorist philosopher who actually lives in Montreal. Um, and the idea is like thisness versus thatness. And so thisness is like the thing that you are perceiving. It's like the thing at hand, and as you experience it or you perceive it, or like if it's like an object that you can pick up and touch, it's like your experience of touching the object and like the relationship that you have to it, the things that it does to you. In other words, you're proceeding from your own like experience. And then sort of like thatness is like labels and like received wisdom and like how other people have described the thing. And another person who talks about this is Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari in this book, What is Philosophy, which is like a really incredible book. It's like the last book they wrote together. And for them, they contrast what they call like the philosophical immanent view of things from the transcendental or religious view of things, where like the philosophical immanent view of things is proceeding from experience and thought, and the transcendental religious version of things is that there are fundamental qualities of things that are kind of far away and like immutable and you can't touch them, and the only way to learn about them is to learn what other people have said about them. And so it's again this idea of like individual experience versus received wisdom. And
Mhm.
I think the reason that a lot of producers can do this sort of blending and it's harder for instrumentalists is because like producers kind of what you're doing, or at least in the new school sense of producer, like where you're like working in a DAW, is that you're really getting your hands dirty with the sounds and you're able to move things around until it all kind of works together, which is a type of practicing like thisness or practicing imminence. And I think it's really that like feeling through all of the little decisions based on some sort of gut feeling, and your gut feeling is your taste. Or you know, if you're listening to your taste, if you're just like obsessed with technical mastery on an instrument, then your gut might lead you elsewhere, and maybe by our standards it'd be leading you astray. But if you're starting from that place of your gut feeling, and you're also therefore kind of starting from the place of like your project, if your project means being sort of existentially aligned with something that you want to communicate, which I think in my case, and it sounds like also in your case, like it kind of is. If you're working through all of those little decisions, then maybe the first time that you try to make something, you won't get results that make any sense, and it'll sound like a really awkward stew of flavors that don't fit together. But it's like if you keep showing up and making like just being very present with little things and adjusting things, then eventually you'll start to arrive at something, you know.
Yeah.
And it's by practicing that like thisness, and I feel like just that framework kind of gets past all these ideas of like collage, or these ideas of like fusion and yeah, like good fusion or bad fusion or whatever, because then you're still dealing with received wisdom, like whether it's jazz fusion, we're like, okay, here's what rock riffs are, here's what jazz riffs are, we're gonna do them at the same time. Or it's this sort of like Irish music EDM thing where it's like we got this, we got this, and we're gonna put them together and now we're done. Like for I think for a really good artist, putting them together would be the very first step in a much longer process of getting
Yeah.
to something interesting. So I just wanted to raise that as like a frame, because for me it's like really in every part of my life, if I'm not practicing thisness, then I feel like the risk of me feeling like I'm being led astray is very high. So
Yeah.
that's just for me. Also, should we talk about a track?
We could. I don't know if there is a single track to talk about. There's just I can show you this set if you want and
Great.
like
Yeah, let's do it.
play things and show like a little bit how I'm playing around, which I don't think is immediately like the right tree to be barking up in the long run. I'll just say I'm just saying this for myself more than anything because I messed around with it just a little bit for the first time in like months
Hmm.
this morning. But it does there is something there. And I think I should say again, you give me screen share. While you give me screen share, I'll
Right.
say that I guess like I think that from like a philosophy perspective of like what is this project, I think that the thing that struck me the most, and it's like about the thing that I can identify about like all the music ever that has really resonated with me, and especially that like has continued to resonate with me over a long period of time, um is just the idea like I kind of think of it all as folk music on
Hmm.
some level. Like it's really all music for people, and usually for like a fairly small number, like the artist probably has a pretty small number of people in mind when they make it, or is just following their own kind of like intentions and their own ideas that grow out of their community. But that's like just one of my favorite things, my favorite notions about music ever, is just the idea of like we're making folk music, you know, which to me means it's like you're making music that either like one a lot often has like a pretty specific function, like you know what is supposed to be happening with a song, and I guess more generally it's like you're typically making music that like it tells some kind of story. And like the thing that I probably or the last year or two that influenced me the most was WB Yeats autobiographies, and just the notion that like him and the rest of him and like Oscar Wilde and George Bernard Shaw and like a few other people that he was working with, that Thomas Synge was really like he was really into Thomas Synge, like he saw all of those people as and himself as just trying to create like a mythology for the Irish. That was
Right.
his
Yeah, yeah,
idea,
yeah.
was like he was trying to make Greek mythology but for Ireland, where it was like as Irish as Greek mythology is Greek, but as also capable of like appealing to universal kind of like more fundamental human sentiments and ideals
Hmm.
as Greek mythology has become. And he was kind of like of the mind of like, Ireland is trying to find its Homer. And like, he was part of that process of like, I'm trying to find like Ireland's Homer. He didn't think he was it. He was like, I am trying to find like Ireland's Homer. I don't know what I am. I'm still like, write my shit. But like, he was convinced that certain people were like, yeah, this is the person, like this person's poetry or like this person's plays are going to be like the thing that's going to, I think he just really felt that like that would allow Ireland. It gets into like politics, but he just really like felt that was like what was going to allow Ireland to like ultimately stand on its own 2 feet and
Hmm.
like get out from underneath Britain. Like that it needed that cultural
Right.
coherence and like
Yeah,
strength
yeah.
to do that. Um, but to me, that like that notion like exported from all of it was just this idea of like you're trying to like create a mythology for like your people, which as a fucking like American growing up in the suburbs of San Jose is a completely different idea. But that's like what I'm kind of currently obsessed by, and that's like the notion that I want to follow the most. All that said, here is this set with just all this stuff in it that I can play around with, most of which were like guitar voice memos from different points. Um, and they're organized too of like things that are where I'm singing and playing guitar, stuff that's like just a voice thing, stuff that's like just a guitar line, which is probably my favorite category of stuff. There's also like random other things like there's keyboard and saxophone ideas, but the stuff that I'm like really focused on are like the guitar riffs or the guitar riffs combined with the vocals. And currently what I'm doing is just like going through these and trying to find the ideas that intrigue me. And then I'm just kind of trying to figure out like how to approach like working on these. So let me see. Let me make sure this goes through Zoom too. But it'll just be things like, you know, what is this actually?
I'll be anything I can become to be worth the trouble you take to love me.
Like I might start with something like that and then just kind of move
Wait,
to
I
like
already I already have a thought, which is that that's already really great. Like, I mean, I'm assuming it's like at the
there's a
threshold of
reason that
being
one is
tonal.
starred. There's a reason that one is starred and at the
Yeah,
top of like a giant pile of stuff.
right. Well, I would just say if you have a bunch of stuff like that, one thought that immediately comes to mind is just sort of like Chris Weismaning it, if you know Chris Weisman.
I don't think so, no.
Okay, he's like a songwriter based in Vermont, who just like puts out like a ton, like
Oh no, I
insane amounts of
do.
music. The super
Yeah.
prolific guy. Yeah, if
Yeah.
even if it's just a fragment, if like, I mean, if you have a bunch of stuff like that and you were able to like get it like to a slightly more developed like performance
Yeah,
thing, like just
exactly.
like sharpening it just a little bit, if you put out
Yeah.
like I mean, this is just a quick thought, but like, if you had like 50 of those and you put out an album of like 50, 20-second long tracks like that are that good, that would be really profound. So,
Yeah, I wouldn't mind that. That might actually be like I think that might actually be what I'm looking for in all this stuff is just to come and take all my best little bits and just figure out which ones to develop because that's what's happened. Like this song is actually much longer, but this one has like a whole vocal over it. Like I made a fake 4-track in here to keep myself from getting too complicated when I was working on these. And
nice.
I played like I made like a they're all just kind of like shitty demos, but I made like a demo of this song that I'm fairly
Don't look up to
just like
Wait,
crummy.
let's keep listening to it.
laws for gods, for the brought your help to this. You're useless and you're smooth. And I fly the
it goes like that. And what I actually have with this one is this is like not even the most recent version. I don't have the most recent version recorded. I just know that line and I worked out the lyrics. And so that song is like very, you could call it done. I think there's like a third section to it besides the two things that trade off.
To be
Um,
honest, based on where you're at, I think it's, I mean, maybe you want to do more. I think it's good. I
No,
think you,
I think that basically that was kind of the thought I had with that one. I was like, okay, I'm just going to learn that. So that one
yeah,
I'm just learning. So it's kind of like there's bits here. I think what the goal with this is really is just like to, because I barely played guitar for ages now. It's like to relearn my best bits and kind of like proceed from there in terms of however much of my music is going to be guitar oriented or keyboard oriented,
yeah.
to
Well,
just
really
kind of
quick
like
though, like,
like reconstitute my language.
yeah, but
And
like if you have the recordings, honestly, I think just put it out, and then if you need to play it live, then maybe there's like a, oh shit, how do I play this? So I got to do this, and I go through that like because I have
yeah,
what when I'm recording stuff, I'm just making up parts on the spot, and then later I have to learn the parts again to perform them, and I think that's totally fine. But like honestly, like this is we're okay. We have two songs. Like
yeah.
we're on our way to either an album or an EP already. Like this is like it's really like I know you're close to it, so it's harder to see, but like that's like awesome. Like
Well,
that's
I'm
like
not that close to it anyway. It's been like a year since I touched any of that stuff. So yeah, no,
okay,
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, like I'm
okay,
kind of
yeah,
like
yeah,
going into it with that attitude of just like as long as it's notably better than all this other crap, then like it's good enough, you know, because I'm not looking for something that's like in this stuff, I'm basically just looking for the best things that I did. So only
yeah.
comparing it to myself. And
Well,
that's
but I
kind of
would
like
say
what's nice about it.
well, also though, if I were to compare it to other stuff, I would say like for example, if that were on like a recent Adrian Lenker record, it would be one of the good tracks.
I
You
hope
know,
so. Yeah. I mean,
like
that's like, yeah, if I could rewrite Forwards, Beck and Rebound or like Terminal Paradise, like that'd be it for me. You know, I'd quit and like go work in finance or some shit, you know, like, and then raise some musicians.
well, my point is that you're I think based on what I'm hearing, like I'm not hearing any reason that you're not already on that level. So I think like I mean I mentioned Adrienne Lenker because she's a songwriter that's like very successful right now that I think is actually really good.
I
So
mean, yeah,
like
same.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, so
She's
you're
amazing.
like so it's not just good relative to these tracks, it's like it is really good. And I think
Good.
it's totally release worthy. So like I think you're already really on and I hear what you're talking about with like all the stuff that we were just talking about where there's the auto tune on the voice. It's that's kind of the
Well, I actually
present.
like that. I kind of want to keep that for a lot
No,
of them actually, because that's a
I
thing
think
that
it's great.
really I think that yeah, I had this friend who basically quit making music after we left Berkeley, but he was an amazing drummer, but he put out this record like as an alias on SoundCloud. And I remember me and all literally all of us were listening to it. All our friends were like, this is just like some of the best music that like I've heard, period. And it sounded like trap Nick Drake, like he was playing like a busted up guitar and like that he would just tune to something that worked that day and just find a line and then just like say shit into auto tune. And I was like, I'm going to steal that style, because I'd actually like to put out songs that are like that. So it's like kind of there's like the Adrian Lenker influence and the like songwriteriness, but then like auto tune on the voice, you know.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a raw thing than like what Justin Vernon did with it, you know, like one voice but auto-tuned, doing this like kind of confessional songwriting stuff. I find that really powerful.
Yeah, I think it's great, and it sounds like ancient, and it sounds futuristic, and it sounds like folkloric, and it sounds like pop music, and it's like everything it's everything that you were just talking about. I think it's there in the music already.
I hope so. Yeah. So that's okay. Thank you. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a good reaction to get. Because yeah, I think I'm just it's weird timing because I'm kind of like just starting back on this. Like my mentality towards music has just been like really fucked for like 2 years pretty much. So I feel like I've just
yeah,
been trying to like free myself from that because I just did not want to get into a situation where I was just like making stuff and then just like traumatized myself by just making a bunch of stuff and just like kind of forcing, like being a shitty boss, you know, like forcing myself to produce music that um I hated and wasn't even enjoying the process of making, you
yeah.
know.
I
That's
have
kind of like
another. Yeah, I have another really quick practical recommendation,
For
which
sure.
is that like there are cool musicians in Montreal, and a good way to get things going, it's like if you can do like really chill house shows, even if it's for like 6 people, I would recommend considering trying to do like a house show once a month and like book like 3 other songwriters and just like get some people in there and start playing the songs for people. And that will just force you to get a performance practice together and like
Yeah.
you start meeting people and building community because that's how I got things going in New York. And it was really, I mean, it was pretty like not glorious to be like doing a lot of the grunt work involved in that, but it really made a difference, and it's really how I got a lot of like the ball rolling. And I think like artistically, I mean, there's always more room to develop and there's always more stuff to write, but based on everything that I'm hearing, I just want to see the external side of it start to really happen, like
Yeah,
because
same.
it's ready. And I
Yeah, I
think
mean, same.
monthly house shows are a lot better than venues or whatever, and like unless you're like really packing a venue. But at a house show, it's really about the people, you know? And so, like, yeah, I mean, that's what I
Yeah.
would recommend. But, like, I think, yeah,
Yeah.
like,
Well, and the
I think,
venue
yeah,
situation is getting as brutal here as it is anywhere else with like pay to play and, just
right,
all the usual music industry bullshit. And like Montreal is way more of a DIY place anyways.
yeah,
And yeah, that's my favorite thing to do. Like all my best performance experiences have been in people's living rooms and music watching experiences. Like most of my best experiences have been in like somebody's living room. So I definitely I'm that idea resonates with me for sure. I'm very
yeah.
amenable to that notion. So yeah, like that's kind of where things are at. And like that is the project to me. Like the project is to try to become like a folklorist. I don't want to talk about it much until I like start to succeed at doing that.
Right.
Um yeah, but that's like that is the current like basically best thing that I can imagine.
I think it's great. I think, yeah, I mean, I'm really excited to hear this stuff.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. Thanks for the thanks for the ideas and like the it's not a lot of it's not new, but I think it's just I find nowadays like I don't often encounter shit that feels super new. It's more just like I encounter something I'm like, oh yeah, that is what I should be thinking about. Like that out of all the things is
Yeah.
really like the important thing to be considering. Um
Totally. The
here,
reminders.
yeah, just like what to prioritize instead of like have yeah. So so yes, I have considered those things, but I've now I know what to continue
Yeah.
considering, or I feel affirmed in continuing to consider that. Thanks. Yeah. I mean, maybe we'll work on some of this stuff at some point. I don't know. It'd be really cool to see like at some point it'd be really cool to work with you as like a producer on something.
Yeah. I mean,
I'd really
hit me
like
up
to see
anytime.
what happens if we can do that. But yeah, still just have to like make life here more stable before I can do too
Totally.
much.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm just trying to get back into it and not just like let this stuff languish in hell.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like
Well, the studio's getting better and better, so whenever you're ready, like, it'd be
I will.
great to
I'll let
have
you
you.
know. I'll let you
Yeah,
know. Yeah, for sure.
awesome. All right, well, for now, I have to go do some things, but this is great, and
Thanks.
yeah, I mean, thank you for like kind of letting me kind of get to, I don't know, experience this with your work.
Sure,
It's really
man.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. It helped. It helped to show you. So thanks. By the way, I should be around on Monday. So if you could use me as like an audience plant, like if there's things that you want to talk about, we can come on and like I can just be like, hey, like I can have some thoughts about it ready to go, and like we can discuss if there are things you would like to record yourself discussing and hope that you get like a really spicy, good like statement on to use as like a clip. Let me know because I'll be around on Monday and we could have like one of those kinds of conversations
Yeah.
for the page. So just let me know. Text me.
Cool. Yeah, totally. I think it might be the case that Jason, who's the Just Intonation kid, might also be showing up on Monday. But
Cool.
everything's good. Would be great to see you there. And yeah, if anything comes to mind, I'll totally
Yeah,
let
let
you
me
know
know.
about that. I
Yeah,
appreciate
let me
the
know
offer.
because for sure. Yeah, because I'm down to chat about mostly anything at this point. Like a lot of it, a lot of what I have to do is just in my own world. So if there's anything I can do to help out, let me
Cool.
know and we'll talk about it. All right, man.
Awesome.
Have a
All
good
right.
weekend.
Yeah, you
Bye.
too.
Thank you.
Awesome. See ya.